October was a bit of a rough month. It began with my birthday. I think it actually began with someone else's birthday. I think there were one or two before me in the month. But anyway, began with my birthday. But then we proceeded to deal with a lot of grief during the month. We had 3 funerals this month. I was speaking to Nicholas this morning as we were preparing, just doing the final bits and pieces and putting things together. And I was reminded that actually we don't have such a rough time here in the suburban context. A priest in Mamelodi or Attridgeville would probably do up to 3 or 4 on a Saturday. And then because they have 3 or 4 on a Saturday, they have to actually do things on the day of resurrection. So they will have maybe one on a Sunday. But they really do have a lot of funerals. And we think, oh, yes, it's been a heavy month, we've had 3. But in actual fact, it's not that busy. But this month, they were intense in a way that there was a very personal contact for me, at least with 2, and then the other one was quite a tragic story, and I'm not going to go into the tragic story there. And then we're watching the social news network, the social networks and stuff like that, and we're thinking, and in amongst all the student stuff that's happening, which we must take notice of, that's important, every now and then some well-meaning devout Christian pops up a Facebook post and says how bad Halloween is. And I have to resist and say, no, you don't understand what Halloween's really all about. But in actual fact, it's a festival that the Christians hijacked from the pagans, and the pagans have hijacked it back, and now we are getting all angry about it because the pagans are celebrating Halloween. Anyway, but one thing that did come up, about a year ago I was reading a book I actually recommended to the congregation, Shane Claiborne's The Irresistible Revolution. And ever since I read that book, I've been following Shane Claiborne. He's an interesting character. But he wrote this: before there was Halloween, there was All Hallows Eve and All Saints' Day. For hundreds of years, before jack-o'-the-lanterns and zombies, and he says candy corn, which is an Americanism, so we don't know what that is, but trick or treat, Christians around the world have remembered the dead, the saints, the cloud of witnesses that have gone before us. Halloween comes from the same root word as hallowed, or halo, meaning holy. This weekend, he writes, liturgical Christians, that's people like us, around the world, honor All Saints' Day by reciting the names of the holy saints of God throughout the centuries. The Presbyterians would object to that if we took my Lives of the Saints and started reciting their names, because we'd be here all day. Then he goes on to write this: rather than glorifying death, Halloween is a time we can celebrate life, remembering the lives of our loved ones and the heroes of the faith in every generation. The dead, dear friends, can inspire the living to truly live. While we don't need more gore and blood, we get enough of that on TV. If we're not watching the news, it's in the movies. There is something sweet about being able to laugh at death and fear, something Halloween gives us permission to do. After all, we know that the dead can rise again, and death has lost its sting. Every year on Halloween, and he says, I talk to our kids about what Halloween really means. It's not about zombies, but it is about the living dead. Just as Jesus rose from the dead, so can we. Just as Lazarus was raised from the dead, so can we be raised from the dead. Dear friends, Halloween is a time to remember how hallowed, how holy life is, and how death has lost its power over us. Halloween is a time to cherish life, laugh at death, and remember that the tombs are empty. That's what Shane Claiborne writes. All Saints' Day, All Hallows, is one of the most underrated church festivals of the year, and the commemoration of the faithful departed, sometimes also known as All Saints, we commemorate that tomorrow, kind of vanishes before the busyness of our lives. All Saints' Day is important because it is the one church festival set aside during the year to tend to our grief. We experience, yes, grief on Good Friday. Jan's picture on the wall there is a very powerful image of what Good Friday is all about. But that grief is for the suffering and death of Christ, and all the grand and wonderful theological ideas that go with that. All Saints' Day, together with tomorrow's commemoration of the faithful departed, is for us a time to remember the heroes of the faith in every generation, for remembering the people we loved, who were important to us, who made an impact on our lives and then died, passing on the mantle of mission and ministry to us, in the same way that Elijah's mantle passed from him to Elisha. But, and some of you will identify with this, grief and loss are part of life's most powerful human experiences. And these often leave us somewhat lonely. Many of us have woken up the morning after the death of a loved one and simply marveled at how the sun can be so inconsiderate and so otherwise and rise the next morning. The earth is really not concerned with our stuff. It continues to turn after our world has been shattered. We are grateful, yes, for all the concern friends and colleagues show us, but find it so strange to realize that while they truly felt sorry for us during the time they were in conversation with us, or the moment they kindly took to send us a card or a bouquet of flowers or an email, this event that turned our world upside down really meant very little to them. They've gone back to their normal lives. The thing is, we're not really angry with them. It's life. Life must go on. Of course, no one would love or care for or agonize over our departed loved one the way our own family would. Of course not. But it is just so surreal to realize that after someone says something kind to us about it, that person will go right back to thinking about what to prepare for lunch or supper, or whether to go to the movies that weekend. Dear friends, it is a realization that all of us have at some time, it is a realization that all of us have at some time or another, that our own personal battles and tragedies and defeats really matter very little in the big picture of the world. They matter very little 364 days of a year in 99.9% of the places on this earth. But our grief does matter on this day. It does matter in this place. On All Saints' Day, in God's holy church, the losses that we have borne over the years come to the fore, and are named for all to hear. On holy ground it happens. On All Saints' Day, our grief is no longer lonely and isolating, but we gather in this sanctuary, in this space, and let our grief bind us together in a new and powerful way. All Saints is an important ministry to us in our losses because it helps us re-enter that place of mourning in a rhythm, year after year, every single November as we usher in Kingdom Tide. Each year, when we revisit the loss, the pain softens and loses a little bit of its sharp edge. It begins to go to its own rest. Every time we name our loved ones among the saints, we honor not only our lives, but our own long battle with memories, both painful and joyful. When St. Paul writes in his letters to the various churches of Asia Minor, he speaks about the saints, the living saints, the ones that are involved in mission and ministry. You, along with the ones with the title saint, are saints. All Saints' Day is so important because it honors the memories of those that have been close and been so much a part of our lives. Most of our departed loved ones had a funeral to commemorate them. But the funeral happens right after the loss, and often emotions are completely chaotic, not to mention the practical circumstances we're trying to manage. As I said, in our suburban context, we tend to be quite clinical about funerals and death, as opposed to the township and more rural context, where it's the entire community that just comes in droves. And sometimes we wonder, well, isn't this just putting a little bit too much pressure on the family that's grieving? That's how it's done. It's different, of course, for everybody. If you have lost someone close to you, either due to sudden accident or long illness, you probably remember the days in the immediate aftermath as a haze of confusion. There are hundreds of details to attend to. You have to notify your friends and the friends of your loved one. There's the organization of the funeral service, pulling together money for a coffin and a funeral. They don't come cheap, by the way. We have to think about wills and estates. We have to think about the volatility of family brought together in a pressure cooker of emotion. Frankly, dear friends, it is often not a time to treasure the memory of our loved one. Many grieving families float through the funeral in a sort of disconnected shock. And this is where All Saints' Day and the commemoration of the faithful departed comes to our rescue. There is no chaos. There are no arrangements to be made, apart from making sure that the names can be pronounced correctly for the people that we're remembering over the last 5 years. No arrangements. There's no being singled out to sit at the front of the church in our mourning garb. We're all in this together. And the ones we are remembering are long settled in their resting places. It's the chance to be private about our grief, taking out our memories in the quiet of our hearts and turning them over one by one, taking our time to remember them and to reflect. But we all enter that sheltered and quiet heart space at the same time, in the same place. as you recall the faces of your dearest departed before your mind's eye, cherishing the chance to do so peacefully and uninterrupted. Your neighbor next to you is doing the same. We enter the valley of the shadow of death together and walk through it in solidarity with one another. There is someone else who is in solidarity with us in our grief, and that is Jesus, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. In our gospel passage today, we see him in the exact situation we have faced in our lives, the inevitable but painful death of someone close to him. Lazarus had been sick. They all knew there was the possibility that he might die. But even Jesus can't believe that he is gone. He doesn't want to believe it. And so he asks if he's been buried, hoping maybe the message has gotten twisted along the way and Lazarus is still just sick. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they say, "Lord, come and see." And then we get that wonderful verse. In the translation I read, it's 4 words, but in most translations, only 2. Jesus wept. Heinrich Lottring, some of you know him, at a funeral recently I attended that he was conducting, he mentioned something about the Vulgate. Now, I'm not a Latin scholar. My Latin is sort of stuck with mottos on coats of arms. But he said something interesting. He said, in the Vulgate, and I can't remember exactly what the words are, and I'm only thinking about it now. I should have actually gone and read it up. But literally translating the Latin, from the Latin to the English, literally and on the surface, it means that Jesus became tears. It's very different from he just simply wept. He became those tears. Jesus sees so much pain in his lifetime, and he bears it so bravely. He sees the suffering of his people crushed under the imperial rule of Rome, and he doesn't cry. He sees 5,000 hungry and poor on the hillside needing food. He doesn't cry. He sees people tormented by demons. He sees people bleeding for 12 years. He sees the blind. He sees the paralyzed and the diseased, and he doesn't cry. He continues his ministry and he cares for them. But here, in the gospel passage today, at last, he breaks down. And for the simple, everyday loss of a simple, everyday, beloved friend. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic. One of his best friends gets sick and dies. And Jesus becomes tears. He weeps. And so perhaps on this day that we do both All Saints and the commemoration of the faithful departed, this day of letting our heartache step out into the open on holy ground, we can be in solidarity with Jesus as much as he is in solidarity with us. He always bears the burden for us. Maybe today we can say, Jesus, we understand how you feel. We're sorry you lost your friend. We love you. Come be with us for a while, and we'll all be in this together. The wonder of the story is that Jesus brought his friend back to life, just as on the final day we will all be brought back to life by him, in order that we might be in him, that we might live with him and in him, and be numbered with the company of those whom we've given the title saint. How did Jesus raise Lazarus up to new life? How did he bring him back from the dead? By calling his name. Lazarus, come out. Today we're doing the same thing. We're calling out the names of the ones we loved who have passed on, and they answer. They are resurrected in our hearts, brought to life in this time and in this space and in our memories. Whether on one side of the border between life and death or the other, we all want to be with our loved ones. As the communion of saints joins spirits across the divide today, we may realize that we ourselves are being called by name, that we are named, that we are loved by the ones who have gone before us, that we are named and we are loved by Christ himself, who calls out, Lazarus, come out. And the instruction is for us to unbind and let them go. Amen.